3 times a week, a man climbed a mountain just to deliver the mail. There was no road into the village of Gásadalur. To reach it, the postman shouldered his bag and walked a steep path over a mountain pass, more than 400 meters up, in wind, rain, and snow, then down the far side to a cluster of houses where only a few dozen people lived. He did this for decades. If someone fell sick, they were carried out the very same way, over the mountain, by hand. And this was not the distant past. People lived like this here until the year 2004. Gásadalur was only one village among many, scattered across a chain of islands so steep, so wind-battered, and so cut off from the rest of the world that ordinary life here seems almost impossible. These are the Faroe Islands, 18 specks of rock adrift in the North Atlantic. So where exactly is this place? Look at the cold grey stretch of the North Atlantic, in the empty triangle between Scotland, Iceland and Norway. Out there, hundreds of kilometers from anywhere, sits a small huddle of islands most people could not find on a map. 18 of them, packed tightly together, separated by narrow sounds and deep fjords carved by ancient ice. The nearest country is Scotland, and even that is over 300 kilometers of open ocean away. The Faroes belong to Denmark, yet they govern themselves, with their own parliament, their own language, and their own flag. Together they cover an area smaller than many cities, and on them live around 54,000 people. The capital, Tórshavn, is one of the smallest in the world. To get here at all, you cross a stretch of sea, famous for some of the roughest weather on Earth. The first thing that strikes anyone who arrives is the weather, because it refuses to sit still. People here have a saying, if you do not like the weather, just wait 5 minutes. Sunshine, fog, driving rain, and brilliant blue sky can all pass over a single hillside within the hour. The wind never truly stops. It pours in off the Atlantic and bends the grass flat, and storms can be fierce enough to ground every flight for days. There are almost no trees, because the wind and the salt simply will not let them grow tall. What you see instead is endless green, vivid emerald slopes cropped close, wrapped in mist and crossed by hundreds of waterfalls that pour straight off the cliffs into the sea. It is beautiful, and it is harsh, and it has shaped every single thing about how people survive out here. And then there are the sheep. The very name of these islands tells you what matters here. In the old language, Faroe means the sheep islands, and the name fits. There are roughly 70,000 sheep out here, against about 54,000 people. The sheep outnumber the humans, and they always have. You see them everywhere, clinging to slopes so steep it looks like they should fall, grazing right at the edge of cliffs that drop hundreds of meters into the waves. For more than 1,000 years, since the first settlers arrived, these animals have meant survival. Wool for clothing against the cold and the wet. Meat dried in the wind to last the long, dark winters. There is even an old Faroese saying that wool is the gold of these islands. Without the sheep, no one could ever have lived in a place this exposed. Look closely at the villages, and you notice something strange on top of the houses. Grass, roofs of living turf, thick and green, growing as if the hillside simply climbed up and over the buildings. This is no decoration. For centuries it was the warmest, cheapest way to seal a home against wind and freezing rain, and many Faroese still keep the tradition alive today. The villages themselves are tiny, often just a scatter of brightly painted wooden houses tucked into the only flat ground for miles, between a steep mountain and the cold edge of a fjord. Each one was once almost its own little world. With the sea too rough to cross and the mountains too high to climb easily, neighbors a few kilometers apart could be cut off from each other for weeks. That deep isolation runs through the whole story of these islands. So how do you connect a country split into 18 pieces by the sea? The Faroese answer is to go under it. Over the last few decades, they have drilled an astonishing network of tunnels straight through their mountains and beneath the ocean floor itself. Today you can drive from island to island without ever seeing a ferry, descending hundreds of meters below the seabed in a tube of rock and concrete. And in one of these undersea tunnels, they built something found nowhere else on the planet, a roundabout. A traffic circle carved out far beneath the waves, where drivers loop around a great stone column lit with art and color. For a nation of barely 50,000 people, it is a staggering feat of engineering, and it has quietly ended the kind of isolation that once defined daily life here. Which brings us back to Gásadalur, the village from the beginning of our story. For most of its history, the only ways in were a brutal climb over the mountain or a dangerous landing by boat. Then, in the year 2004, everything changed. Workers bored a narrow single-lane tunnel straight through the mountain, and suddenly the village that time forgot was a short drive from the rest of the world. Today, Gásadalur is one of the most photographed places in the entire North Atlantic, and for good reason. On its edge, a waterfall called Múlafossur pours off a green cliff and falls cleanly into the open ocean, with the village and a jagged peak rising behind it. It is the perfect picture of these islands. Astonishing beauty, born out of astonishing isolation. The Faroes are full of sights that seem to bend the rules of nature. The most famous of all is a lake that appears to hang in the sky above the sea. It is called Sorvagsvatn, the largest lake on the islands, and it sits in a basin near the cliff edge on the island of Vágar. Stand at the right spot and look back, and the water seems to float hundreds of meters above the ocean, as if the whole lake were about to spill over the edge of the world. It is an optical illusion, a trick of perspective and steep terrain, but standing there, it does not feel like one. Where the lake finally does meet the cliff, its water tips over in a waterfall that drops straight down into the crashing Atlantic far below. Few places on Earth play with the eye quite like this. Life on these islands has always meant a close, hard bond with the sea and the creatures around it. The cliffs here are some of the great seabird colonies of the North Atlantic. In summer, the island of Mykines fills with puffins, their burrows packed into the grass at the very edge of vertical drops. For generations, islanders climbed those cliffs on ropes to gather eggs and birds, risking their lives for food in a land with almost no farming. And the same need gave rise to the island's most controversial tradition, the grinderdrap, a communal hunt of pilot whales driven into the bays. That has fed the Faroese for centuries, and that much of the outside world now condemns. It is a raw reminder that out here, survival has never been gentle, and that these islands still live by rules of their own. Today, the Faroe Islands stand in a strange in-between place. They are wired with high-speed internet, served by an airport, and those remarkable tunnels, and increasingly discovered by travelers chasing the most dramatic scenery in Europe. And yet they remain unmistakably their own. They speak Faroese, a language descended from the Old Norse of the Vikings, who first settled here. They govern themselves, and many quietly dream of full independence from Denmark. They have stayed sealed off, not by walls or by law, but by sheer distance, by the ocean, and by the wind. A handful of islands at the far edge of the map, where sheep still outnumber people, where the mail once came over a mountain, and where the modern world arrives strictly on the island's own terms. If you could visit just one sealed corner of Europe, would it be this one? Tell me below.